Rini, would you like to go ahead and kick it off and talk about what Mozzaz does and talk about how we got together and the AI project that we're working on?
Yeah, sure. So no, this is good. So first, thanks everyone, and thanks for this opportunity to discuss and talk about big data, AI, healthcare, and what's going on, and some of the challenges and opportunities. I'm Rini. I'm co-founder and CEO of Mozzaz. We are a patient engagement company that focuses on personalized healthcare and personalized engagement experiences in digital health. And we take that a step further in the sense that we kind of focus on complex care programs and sort of areas where engagement is a challenge and where personalization really becomes key. And my background, I used to be at Microsoft for a number of years before we started Mozzaz. My background is data science. I'm an actuarial scientist by academic nature, and it's all about risk modeling and statistics and analytics, and that's where I come from. So now, taking that kind of background and being immersed into the world of healthcare. I have a son with a disability, so this is really what's kind of propelled me into this space, and really looking at how we can take data, shape data, and use it in very interesting ways to deliver better outcomes that are actionable and personalized and just fit into a workflow, right? So it helps obviously the patient and families, but how does it become meaningful and help the clinicians at the end of the day, right? How does it help make their work days and their workflows? How do we improve those workflows and enhance those workflows? Not just for clinicians, it's for any stakeholder who's involved with healthcare and programs such as the ones we're involved with. So it's an exciting time because, and that we talk a lot, and we're starting to see this now, right? How machines, the cost of machines are dropping, the cost of power is dropping, compute power is dropping in terms of price, software is getting better, right? There's microservices that can really be enabled and activated for really leveraging different pieces of the technology on demand, if you will. And those are powerful concepts, right? We didn't really have this kind of model, 5-10 years ago, right? So it's getting better. And with that, there's a lot of opportunities where, we can ingest data, we can try to understand data, and we can really try to make that data actionable. And that's the exciting part. There's so much more to do, right? We're just kind of scratching the surface still. And, we started off in the days, and Ed, this, right? So, business intelligence and BI and business analytics, using data to kind of drive some data analytics for your business from an operations perspective, and then taking a step further and looking at sort of descriptive analytics, looking at historical data and trying to understand what happened from a historical perspective. And now it's really taking it to the next level and looking at predictive analytics, and even a step further and looking at prescriptive analytics, right? And that's kind of where the opportunity lies. So just it's an exciting time. There's a lot going on, and the things that we started working on, and specifically looking at sort of the workers' compensation space and medical malpractice and injury, right? And looking at data, how data can be mined and analyzed to provide information to legal teams, to the healthcare professional, as well as to the individual who's got a claim, right? And helping kind of connect all the dots and provide some analytics and provide some efficiency across that type of process becomes really interesting.
Yeah, that
was my quick intro, Ed.
Yeah, that works perfectly, and you're 100% right. And going back, that's right. Business intelligence, disease management is now care coordination. The names have changed, but the problems are still the same. I actually, back in the day, I actually was probably one of the first people to coin, and actually have documentation from the Copyright Bureau, clinical data repository. And now we're talking about data lakes and things of that nature. I'm trying to figure out exactly what that what that entails, but it seems like we've got different platforms, but the problems are still the same. And the ability to create that elusive interoperability and read information, and the expectation, maybe there's going to be an HL7 or a FHIR or some type of interchange format. It's not even the case in healthcare. That expectation is not fulfilled. And then when we start crossing other segments, as you mentioned, the project that we were working on with the legal community, we're back to faxes and PDFs, but certainly looking at machine learning and the capabilities that AI has to offer, gives us some hope that as we go forward, we'll have some better applications to help share information with the appropriate people. But by way of introduction, I've been in this business for a number of years. Was actually one of the founding members of the ASTM 1238 committee, which actually became the clinical side of HL7. And had developed one of the first electronic health records that actually communicated with third parties, laboratories that are now known as Quest and still known as LabCorp. Back in the day were MetPath and SmithKline, and they were all competing against each other. And we were presenting an application that allowed folks folks such as physicians to generate longitudinal records and create some of their own reporting on their own. And now here we are, 20, 25 years later, and these problems are still out there. We've developed applications, but people are still talking about, how do we get a longitudinal record? How do we share information? It's just very interesting. And one of the things that I was thinking about, because when we started the project, and I think a lot of folks look at AI, and they look at it in one way, shape, or form very monolithically, and that that technology will solve the problem. And the reality is it does take a little bit of work.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, it's interesting, right? And sort of the background you just kind of painted here. So, hospitals are generating petabytes of patient data per year, right? Thousands, like million petabytes of data. Yet only 3% of it's actually tagged as meaningful analytical use data, right? Only 3%. 97% of that data is not being used for anything. It's like a waste, right? And think of that gold mine, right? There's just so much information there. There's so much data there that you could harness and dig into and just kind of analyze, but it's not. An example, right? A bedside ECG monitor, and I'm just talking to an ECG specialist, a heart specialist the other day. A bedside ECG monitor generates approximately 1 gigabyte of data per bed per day. That's a lot of data. That's a lot of information, right? And so just think of that opportunity and how if organizations could harness that data, understand that data, shape that data, build the correlations across that data. That's a lot of information just for that one single patient, right? From an ECG monitor. Imagine all the other monitors. Imagine all the other data that's being collected, right? So it's just amazing the amount of data that is there, but just is still, and as you mentioned, and that's still very relevant. It's still difficult to get your hands wrapped around and put a real good data analytics strategy together, and that involves interoperability, data sharing, governance, security, right, and trust, right? So there's still some very big challenges in healthcare that we're seeing when it comes to predictive analytics. The obvious models, the the models where you have good measurable data, you have good patterns that have been modeled and identified and validated by different types of patients, right? So the models hold up across the population, right? We're starting to see a lot of those types of models in chronic illness, right? That they hold up pretty good, and you know, they're well validated and well tested. But you know, there's a whole other side of data, and that is, you know, with respect to a person's health, and that involves, you know, their mind, right? What about their mental health? What about behavioral economics, right? You know, and taking that into account with all sort of the physical measures that you can capture, and shaping, you know, providing sort of a holistic view of that patient that can kind of predict how they may be, or you know, have prescriptive analytics on what an intervention or treatment could do to help that individual, right? So many, you know, variables and indicators that still really need to be harnessed and built and modeled, and then really trusted, right? And you mentioned the labs, right? You know, it's funny, I was talking to another clinician friends the other day. You know, it's trust and transparency in healthcare is critical, right? Obviously, and there's really only one, you know, a good model for trust in healthcare that seems to work really well is lab data. Every time you get a lab test, you know, clinicians and patients don't really question it too much. They just they accept it, right? They accept it as a measure. And
Rini, you don't want to get me started on Theranos right now, because that was they had
yeah,
that lab data and just totally abused the trust. But no, I agree 100%. It's I think I saw numbers. It's above 80%, 85% that the lab data will identify what the diagnosis is, or
yeah,
give meaningful information. And actually, lab data, even you know, beyond medicine and clinical trials for pharmaceutical companies, the lab data is the #1 exclusionary characteristic. If your labs don't match, then you won't be included in a clinical trial for the most part in virtually every case. So it becomes
yeah,
very interesting going forward.
yeah.
So it
And
looks like we have video. How about them
oh
apples?
yeah,
There we go. That works. Perfect.
hey, there you
So,
are.
Got it figured
yeah,
out, guys. We're on now. Thank you.
outstanding. Way to go. We're rocking and rolling. Looking good, Rini. So yeah, that's excellent work, Kyle. So yeah, the lab data definitely presents us with an opportunity, and you know, that's an example of a file where it's kind of a hierarchical in nature. There's an order, and then there's a list of results attached to it, which becomes you know, becomes very interesting as we're you know, trying to read information and put them into placeholders in an electronic record. And I was thinking that you know, maybe let's talk about some of the issues that we deal with, you know, trying to process some of these file formats that we see, because we're obviously not getting, especially in the medical legal world, we're not getting anything close to HL7 files on this project that we're working on. You know, what are your thoughts on you know, when you go into a hospital or a pharmacy or a group, you know, what's your expectation on getting, you know, actual files that are in some standard format, or, you know, that actually link with some standard, or working, you know, working with some of the outside vendors?
Yeah, you know, I think file format and standardization, be it HL7 or Smart on Fire, I mean, you know, that's becoming better, which is good. The big problem though, Ed, is interoperability and data sharing, right? It is so so governed, and you know, there's so many statutory legalities around that, and so many different statutory authorities around data in healthcare, that it makes it really difficult to share freely the data across institutions, across providers, right, and across different health systems. And that makes it tough, right? Because totally understand security and privacy is super important, but there's a lot of barriers in place that kind of prevent that free sharing of data, especially when it comes to healthcare. And so So that's, I would say the interoperability part, the data sharing part is probably a big complexity. Because when you look at a predictive analytics model, when you look at a data model, it high accuracy for a data model really requires on varying data points, right? You really need data points from a number of different sources for a large sample set for different types of individuals to really test your model, right? Because you're trying to build a model that can accommodate sort of all sorts of variabilities. And so when you're only, when you have a model that's kind of just built on a limited data source or a limited data set, that's not truly a strong model, right? There will be holes in that model. And so we definitely see that, but the steps are in place, and I think the intent to share data and interoperability is there. Is still a long way to go.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I was gonna, when Jennifer had brought up that she was having this data economics festival, I had explained some of the issues that we went through, trying to train the model ahead of time for what to expect. And I think it became, it becomes very interesting in the battles that we're facing, is that sometimes you don't know what to expect, especially in healthcare. You could have 5,000 different hospitals generating an endless variety of different reports, not to mention all the various physicians that are linking up. And in the case of the personal injury, workers' comp scenarios that we were discussing, we also have situations where you have rehab facilities, pain management, formats coming from all different spaces. And it was kind of interesting as we were going through the process, really discovering that, just by throwing AI at it, or machine learning algorithm, it wasn't just going to solve it. And me, I would, every time I start, I know that it's not the case, but I fall into the technology trap and say, okay, that image processor will take care of it. No big, we got it. And then all of a sudden it's, well, let's go ahead and train it. I mean, what do you think about, that situation, and, that we might actually ultimately have to deal with that, the only interoperability format that we have in this world is PDF files.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? I mean, the project that we're working on, Ed, and this workers' comp model is, we're dealing with faxes, right? And PDFs, like you mentioned. So we're dealing with unstructured data that's in a format that's in a PDF or a scanned image. And so then there's got to be some technology to extract it and then put it in some sort of, we've got to label it, put it in a database, got to label it somehow, and then automatically, correlate it or add it to other sort of clusters, right? And it's quite the interesting project. It's a challenge, right? And so yeah, it's taking that unstructured data and making it structured and meaningful and smart. And so now the next time you get a document that looks something like the one you just scanned, it should kind of understand what that document is, right? As best it can. So there's got to be some sort of confidence factor that you associate with these scans. And so it's a really, really interesting model, but it's a big problem to solve, just like what we're doing with Giupedi. And so, and you think of it, right? So some of these medical indexes that we see, there's sort of like hundreds of pages for that one individual patient, right? That's a lot of information. That's each one of those words, each one of the pieces of information in those hundreds of pages becomes a data point, becomes a data entity for that patient, right?
Yeah.
And becomes a data cloud that belongs to that patient. And so now trying to understand that data cloud and trying to understand, trying to use machine learning to derive a picture of that individual can be very interesting. I'll give you
I saw this image, and I kept on thinking to myself that, the asteroid was the medical data hitting the machine learning. And it just, made me think that, wouldn't it be nice if, we could just sit back and watch it, but unfortunately we're actually in this business, and so we're actually right there on planet Earth when it gets hit by that medical data. So
Yes.
I brought this up because someone told me that you always put kittens in videos because it goes viral. But I rescued a cat about a year ago, and I thought this kind of fits into the technology piece a little bit. I went on the street, and there was a bunch of people sitting around a car playing YouTube videos with the sound of meow, 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 cat. And I said, what's going on here? And all these, people were saying, well, there's a kitten underneath the car, and, we're using the video to try and get the kitten out. And I'm like, no, you don't do it like that. You just have to go in, go down. So I went underneath the car, got a little bit dirty, grabbed the kitten, and now I end up having a cat named Lucy. So, the technology doesn't necessarily just solve it. Sometimes you got to get your hands dirty, get down on the ground, and grab that cat and save it. But we talked about some of the things that you were doing with Mozzaz, and I think as you said, it's kind of built on the Microsoft platform. I just what types of services out of these are we looking at as we move forward? What type of tools do you think are most helpful in the work we're trying to do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So number one is your infrastructure, right? So you got to make sure you got the compute power and the data sources, right? The databases that can manage all this data. And so this is a nice thing that Azure provides, and other cloud platforms have something similar. But we're building ours on top of the Microsoft Azure platform, and so they've got a nice set of platform as a service type models for infrastructure, right? So you want to spin up a new data lake, you want to spin up a new database. It's easy to spin that up, right? Back in the day, we would have to have that physical server and the SQL expert to set things up, but now everything's kind of on demand. You can just switch things on as needed. So you've got the infrastructure layer, which is super important, and then obviously now is you layer on top of that the set of services that you're going to use. So for the project that we're working on, Ed, we're using the machine learning algorithms, right? So
Gotcha.
Learning a document, learning more about that patient, learning about that individual's patient journey, right, in terms of a workers' comp claim. So that becomes interesting. And what that means in the real world is, if the individual's had a physical injury, maybe they've hurt their back, right? Was an X-ray done, and was an X-ray done in an X amount of time, right? Was it done within a few weeks, or was it done months later, right? And then if there was an X-ray done, then the report, what did the report show, and what kind of medication, what kind of physiotherapy, and so you can start building what that patient journey should be in a model. And then based on the events that you're collecting through the machine learning, is it learning? Has Ed gone through these different phases? Has he gone through these different activities?
That's Rini, I started to cut you off, but that's actually fits in. There's a couple of interesting questions that some people brought up. There's Jennifer actually brought up a question, that how can you use AI or this technology to deal with doctors or clinicians that may not be treating a patient optimally? And you just kind of started talking about that, that if you overlay an algorithm, there's a possibility to take that. And just one other question that I want to hit you with before someone else asks the question, how do we put a valuation on this data? This seems incredibly valuable, and I've got to agree with that. What are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, so on the workbook, so it's got to tie back to the clinician's workflow, right? It's got to tie back to a decision workflow sort of paradigm that the clinician can then use to treat that individual patient, right? So there's got to be information that's consumable for the patient, but then really for the clinical team, right? How do they use this data to provide better care, right? And so we see a lot of that in sort of a chronic illness, right? Whereas the models are well built and there's a good sort of prescriptive sort of guidance in terms of a patient's journey. So in those sort of long-term chronic and preventative cases where we can identify risk factors, so you can use the data to identify, if Ed hasn't gone for his X-ray and he's not really doing his physiotherapy, and from the data we can also see that he's kind of refilling his prescriptions quite a bit. Maybe that's a risk factor, right? And maybe that has a different treatment modality. So there's a bunch of risk factors that can be identified in the model. The stratification then, because then you stratify, saying who are my top patients at risk that I need a plan around with an intervention, right? Because then there's an intervention. There's something that you have to do. So so predictive analytics, and then we talked about this quite a bit. There's a maturity model to predictive analytics, right? So there's and you got to you can't boil the ocean. You got to take it step by step, and maybe focusing on a specific disease state for your specific practice is the best way to go, because those models are maybe well understood and trusted by clinicians. But the the ability to look at risk factors and stratify is usually the first step. And then you would be able to kind of focus on those patients that need high acuity or need a certain level of care that you have easily identified.
But along those lines, I think one of the things we talked about is the potential if we're sharing this data and we see a clinician may not be providing optimal care.
Yes.
We can very easily use algorithms and care coordination types of models that folks like Mayo or the Cleveland Clinic or other folks like that have developed, and apply them and kind of give a nudge to the clinicians to say, well, have you considered this, or this is something that the research looks at very favorably. So that's a way to handle it. I think as we gather the data and we start collecting some of the metadata, and as you said, start looking at the longitudinal care that's being provided to the patient, and once you've granularized some of that information from multiple sources, you can go ahead and make some decisions. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you think about it, right? So like the business that we're in, patient engagement business, our patients have an app, and they're recording. There's recording data. They're recording their moods. They're recording their symptoms. Maybe they're using devices, and the devices are passively collecting data on that individual. So there's a lot of patient-generated data that's being collected as well, right? And so that overlaid with sort of the clinical AI models that are providing information to the clinicians, there's some very interesting interventions that can be applied right at the right time. And again, we're just kind of on the cusp of that. We're just starting to see some of that in practice for very specific use cases. But I think surgery and cardiac care is one of the big ones. Diabetes is another one. So some of the chronic illnesses is definitely in areas where we're seeing a lot of action. So yeah, no, and the second question around value, and I harp on this quite a bit because this is really, really important. One of the big challenges, all this sounds good, big data, models, and the promise of predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics, but it's still not widely adopted in practice, right? And what we see in the health systems and in organizations is there's got to be top-down buy-in from the organization that this model or this predictive analytics strategy is trustworthy. It's going to help clinicians. It's going to help patients, and it's going to help you making decisions. Right? Some clinicians feel like they're losing that decision power, if you will, decision-making power, and being not trusting it to fit into their clinical workflow. So what we need to do is, again, we start small, but we really need to make sure that we can prove ROI. We need to be able to prove that it is providing value, right? Margins in chronic illness and clinical care are razor thin, right? And so we need to show, and especially as we start shifting from fee for service to fee for value-based care, the opportunity to kind of eliminate and mitigate waste and reduce cost becomes important, right? So if we can find ways to shave costs, so your profit margins, which typically range between 2 to 3% in chronic illness. And if you can raise those profit margins just slightly, or just protect those profit margins through better cost management, it goes a long way. So when you in trying to show value and ROI, you really need to understand, what problem am I solving, and it needs to be tied to your strategic sort of vision and your sort of business objective, your clinical objective. So it's got to be really tied to those things. And then what questions do I need answered, right? How is this tool going to help me answer these questions and help me prove value? Will it help prevent an individual with their hospitalization, or prevent readmits into a hospital, which then supports a fee for value-based model, right? Value-based care model, reimbursement, right? Does it help with just kind of medication balancing and adherence, which are all good things, so every program is unique. Every program has different clinical drivers, what I call business drivers, and cost drivers that really need to be understood. And this is where organizations like ourselves, we come in and we kind of help you look at the data, look at the big picture, look at the types of information you have, the types of questions you're trying to solve, understand your sort of the business economics of your practice, and then try to position a model that makes that will provide that ROI, right? It needs to provide value and an ROI at the end of the day.
I think just real quick. I think I always look at IQVIA, and I'm always amazed at the company is a $41 billion plus market cap company. Did $11 billion last year in annual revenues, and all they do is repackage data. They package the data that we're talking about, and you're talking about 2-3% margins, at the clinics and hospitals in some cases with certain areas of care. Seeing the margins that this data, when it's packaged and sold to entities, medical device companies, pharmaceutical companies, for actionable types of intelligence, it's just boggles the mind that these third-party services are making that kind of bank off of this data.
Yeah, and it's very interesting, as I mentioned before, right? 97% of the data that's collected through a health system or a hospital is not used. And the reason it's not used is because they don't have an infrastructure or an operational plan in place, right, with the right talent, which is hard to get and hard to retain, and the right sort of infrastructure in place to kind of really put a team together and work on these models, right, and work on this data analytics. Ed, the company that you were meeting with yesterday, I believe, right, which is a big law firm, they have a team of people just doing data analytics, right? And so, which is really interesting. And so lack of available budget and a clear understanding of value and ROI are some of the barriers to wider adoption, right? Is still not clear how this can help organizations unless you have a model and it's been validated and proven, and that you can replicate, right? But you do need to invest in the fundamentals, either through a vendor or through your own setup, and then which is difficult because the talent is also difficult to retain, right? So, but the ROI is there, and it can be there for models that you can trust and have proven in market, of which there are several.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things, and actually, just looking at the time, I wanted to bring up just to give an example of the what we went through, and I guess we can talk through it. Just a quick demo on that product, because that's I think very interesting to kind of take a look at. And I'm not sure if we can see that yet. Maybe we can, maybe not. Let's see. No, not yet. Let's move over to here. There we go. So here we are. Now let's go ahead. Yep, because this is basically fundamentally what we were talking about when we tried to deal with what AI could possibly do. We were basically uploading a file, and that file looks like a PDF or here. Let's see. That's
So scan file, right?
yeah, this will be one of the files that we had, and process the file. And basically what happens once that data comes in, it's the base file is just such a mess, and applying some of the AI that and machine learning algorithms to build and process this, I think it's been pretty remarkable that we've actually gotten as far as we have. Let's open that, and just real quickly, this is what the original file looked like. The original document looked like something like this. So this is what we're working with, and this is what's being passed all around to between doctors, lawyers, and other folks. And it's just an ugly looking document, just going through it. And we actually went through and you incorporated some of the machine learning technology to create these values and tags. I mean, what did you do here? Because I was pretty darn impressed when you put that together.
Yeah, and it was interesting, right? So we had the machine learning about these documents itself. So the initial sort of setup was, okay, let's create sort of the labels and the template of what kind of data that we're looking for. And then the machine learning would scan through all the documents and kind of identify which things look like a date, which things may be a pain score, which things look like a complaint, right? And build it itself, which is kind of neat, right? So you don't need somebody there and saying, yep, this is a pain complaint, this is the facility. You don't have to go in and map each data element. The machine learning was intelligent enough. Here's a key. Here's a key in a table, and this is what the value for that key represents, and automatically kind of snapping it together. Now, this is what the machine is doing. The next step would be for someone just to give it a quick glance and say, yeah, that looks right. That looks right. Oh no, you know what? That was a scroll on this piece of paper, and that didn't kind of match the key properly. I would say our accuracy is pretty good with machine learning that we've built, Ed, and sort of the testing that we've done, which is pretty neat. But otherwise, just a quick glance to kind of approve and validate the document is pretty neat. This kind of process.
So I'm sorry, just jumping in. So ultimately, which you really do have to have. You still have some humans, allowing humans in the loop still to validate that something actually works or is the value that it's intended to. At least for now, as the algorithm learns. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's going to get better and better over time. The more times these types of documents, and I talk about data variability, right? The more different types of a progress note type comes in, or an imaging report comes in, the better the system will get at really understanding that what this document is. So we take that document, we take it apart, look at all the elements, and look at all the keys, parse it, put it into a database. Once it's in a database, you can do all the slicing and dicing and sort of the analytics and the correlations across all those data elements, which makes it very, very powerful. And all this information is tied to that one client, Archie Andrews. Yep. So all these data elements belong to Archie Andrews, right? Which is really powerful. So it becomes really interesting. So now imagine this, right? So now the system your system paints a timeline of events automatically for Archie, right? When did the incident happen? When did he get injured? When did he go, get his diagnosis? So what was that diagnosis? And then what were the series of tests that happened afterwards? And what kind of medication is he on, right? And when's his anticipated back to work or
that when we've shown this to attorneys and we've shown this to physicians that are involved in, trying to get the data that, a lot of these attorneys have in the workers' comp, PI, medical malpractice world, they just are astounded when they see, those ugly looking files turn into something that, is actually actionable information. I think, getting back to one of the questions that came up talking about, how important or how valuable this data is, once you have the data in a granularized format and it's been looked at through some of these machine learning algorithms, there's a lot that you can end up doing with it. And, getting back to actually a question that Jennifer, I believe, had was, how do you deal with a situation where a patient may have, or a clinician may not be maybe giving suboptimal care? Well, here's a situation where, if, let's say, a patient hasn't been seen in a certain period of time, there hasn't been enough engagement on a patient. Well, we could know just by whether or not a file's been looked at or a document's been uploaded, or which would generate some information, meta information about a transaction. We can know that if someone hasn't been looked at. So by seeing old engagement, a patient hasn't seen a doctor, and maybe and especially in their rehab situation, they haven't seen a doctor, they haven't seen a rehab facility, they haven't seen anything for the last 30 days. Well, guess what? That's something that is actionable, and just a very simple way of setting up your algorithm, your care coordination going forward. And that's when you have that data abstracted and granularized, this is, the type of action that, becomes very interesting.
Yeah, a great example of making the data actionable, right? And again, without this kind of system, it wasn't possible, right? Like you weren't able to get this kind of granularity by going through each document and kind of manually trying to identify engagement level or risk, right? Risk to a claim.
Not at all.
The health, yeah.
And
so this saves the lawyers and the healthcare teams a lot of time, right? And it's amazing to see this kind of example in practice.
yeah, and frankly, we can't do it without the machine learning technology and with the hope of making it better, because ultimately, like I said, at some point in time, when those little YouTube videos get smarter and smarter, that cat might actually come out from under the car. But we still have a little bit of work to do, and that's why I mentioned there is work to be done. But if you set up, I think, the interfaces and you set up the workflow in a manner that makes sense, I think you can make that transition a bit easier. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The making all this data consumable, right, through different means, so consumable to the end patient or to the lawyer or to the doctor, right? That's timely and then that's relevant and in context to what you're trying to do, right? Is what the whole, it's one of the objectives of this sort of solution. And so much information, so much data. How do you make it relevant and in context to the problem you're trying to solve, with the question you're trying to answer? It's a big thing. Let me show you another quick. Can I just share my screen real quick?
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
I'm just going to share with you sort of the other kind of work that we're doing in the world of disability. So as I mentioned, I have son with autism as an example, and we're doing a lot of interesting work that we started with cognitive services.
Gotcha.
And so, if you can see my screen here, so we're able to, detect a face, right? And detect the face, and there's different signals.
I'm not, Rini, I'm not seeing anything on the
oh, you're not
screen.
seeing? Okay,
No.
I'm sorry. Oh, it kind of froze on me.
Yeah, it says it started screen sharing, but nothing there.
Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? I just take it back. It's not.
Okay.
Okay, right here.
Oh, there we go. Okay, gotcha. Okay.
I got it. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, good. So then, what we're able to do is detect face emotions or signals, as we call it,
Mhm.
detect voice, right? Pitch and tone, and even words. And those all become mapped to data entities, data points, right? So a happy face could look something like this, right? And a mad face has different signals. And then you push out different interventions or different output or a different action based on data signals.
Wow, Rini,
So
that's awesome. I mean, that's phenomenal. I did not realize you were doing that. That's
yeah,
phenomenal.
we're doing a lot of this type of stuff. And just information around text analytics, right? So you know, if someone's typed in something or says something, we can use semantic text analytics to really understand, is that a negative sentiment or is that a positive sentiment, right? And so, for example, in this, the client completed all his homework exercises. He's been happy and was able to find a job in 2 months. This machine learning automatically went in there and said, you know what, based on this phrase and this wording, that seems like a positive thing. That's good, right?
No
A
doubt.
negative text sentiment is client ran away from home 5 times in the last 12 months, considered a suicide ideation and was hospitalized. The system took that and automatically learned that that's a negative phrase.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, suicide ideation is definitely would be a red
Yep.
flag over attendance at school. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, right?
Yeah.
But the idea is, how do you take these unstructured data points, unstructured information, right? Not just data points, and map it to a data entity with some sort of score. And once it has a score, then you can start doing all sorts of interesting analytics.
I think right now I mean, it's gone pretty much 45 minutes or so. I guess let's see if we can open it up for questioning. I think Kyle is over there, or other folks. Any thoughts or anything you'd like us to focus on? And first and foremost, I want to thank Lydian and Jennifer and your whole team, because this what you're putting together is absolutely fantastic. Hello. Any questions? Anybody else? Tap dance? No, but I guess that's about all we have for today. And Rini, good talking to you once again. I just learned a few things.
That was fun.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Appreciate it. Once again, thanks to the Lydian folks. And wait, looks like there might be some questions here. Yeah, there's a tendency for people to see a result or a number, take it certain. I think the commonly. Well, we got someone said, can we see a little bit more of the technology Rini was showing us? Let's. I think that's something that makes sense. Can you go through that? Share your screen again with the technology that you had.
Yeah, I don't have my full demo running.
Oh,
But,
okay. I mean, it was.
what I can do. So let me see.
And this is another good question, kind of tied to that. What are some of the pitfalls of using AI and making critical healthcare decisions? What are your thoughts on that as well?
Sorry, what was the question?
What are some of the pitfalls of AI in making critical healthcare decisions? And I'll say one thing. One of the things that we're always concerned about. When matching patients, for instance, the potential of having a patient state that that if the AI matches a patient that has an allergy to penicillin or doesn't have an allergy to penicillin, and that's represented in what the patient presents, and it's accidentally added to a chart, or a patient that actually does have an allergy, there could be loss of life that occurs. So it becomes very mission critical very quickly. But I mean, what kind of thoughts do you have on that, Rini? Some of the pitfalls of using
absolutely.
AI.
Yeah, and especially in healthcare, right? Because there are so many different variables, and I think the thing that I keep mentioning is there's passive data, there's active data, there's measurable data, and there's data that, and then there's subjective and objective data, right? There's so many different variations of data. And the challenge in healthcare is, if you're just looking at measurable data, that's objective, and you can build a model around that, that's fine. But the challenge in healthcare is, the interoperability. So are you able to collect data for social determinants of health, right? Are you able to pull that information in? Are you able to pull claims data in? Are you able to pull prescription data in? What about data for how that individual's feeling, right? Patient generated data. So my challenge with AI and AI and analytics and predictive analytics, we're in this world, Ed. So there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of hype, right?
And in fact, actually just tying in with this, another good question was, how do you communicate your level of certainty or uncertainty when it comes to AI ML? And, you just mentioned, for instance, SDOH, and I keep on thinking about, one example is, especially after seeing some of the work that you're doing with the face recognition, I was working with a project where we went into a house and tried to determine based on pictures, decide what the fall risk could potentially be. So, I mean, how do you communicate your level of certainty or uncertainty when it comes to AI and ML?
Lot of data modeling. So, I mean, it becomes very specific to the, I like to focus on specific disease cases, right? Or programs, right? Chronic illness. And so, because then you can really vet that model, very closely, because you know what the indicators are, you know what the measurements are. Some of those models like heart disease and diabetes, they've been well researched, right? Post-surgery or post-operative sort of recovery, right? For various surgeries, they've been well studied, and there's good models out there, right? So once there's a model that you can trust, and that's widely accepted in industry, then you got a level of confidence that works, right? So now the next trick is making sure you got the right data sources and the right enough variation of data that gives you a good picture. So again, every program's different, and so we can help you with that. We can help you understand that, but it is tricky, because again, I always like to look at, it's a mind-body connection, right? So what about how a person's thinking? That affects how a person's physical symptoms could manifest, right? And how they behave in terms of their actions, right? And so the ability to how do you build that into a model, right? That's a challenge, right? And so you can't model everything. The stuff you can measure and stuff that's kind of reported objectively, maybe by the patient themselves. You can harness that model. In terms of again, I talk about descriptive analytics and predictive analytics, looking at sort of past events and kind of figuring out what did that individual do when these 5 things happened, right? That's sorry, that's my dog. That's a good sort of descriptive analytic model. But going predictive analytics, you do need that data and that model to be vetted and have a number of different variations of data that can be used for that model to build that confidence level, right?
But just tying on to what that, you've got a couple more questions. Everyone wants to ask Rini questions. No questions for me. That's okay. Let's see. Here's the $1 million question. How real world ready are your cognitive services APIs? What's the scaling? What are the implementation in terms of variants of data sets, rules around the data sets? That's an excellent question. And I would say also the issues, once again, talking about the your level of certainty. What about sentiment analysis and having fail safes that guard against false positives? Some very good questions, I would say.
Yeah, and the key to this is the system's got to learn about you, right? So the system's learning about my son. The system is constantly learning, how's my my son's, different facial expressions and different things he says and different actions, right? So it learns my son, and it learns fairly quickly, because you think about it, there's so many data points, so many signals feeding into the machine, right? And so it's constantly kind of building that digital picture, and so it becomes really interesting. Again, it all comes back to the model then. So sentiment analysis, yeah, you know what, it's pretty good. I would still say we're in the early days, and they can be used as an indicator for clinical teams, to kind of help them respond to something. So we're running some large suicide ideation projects in the state of Tennessee, and we've been doing it for the last 4 years, for almost 5 years. And so understanding chats and understanding chatbots and understanding conversational AI, if you will, right? And just starting now just to parse those text analytics, the semantics, and we're just starting to learn that now. It is not based, and I would not base it on just leaving it to the machine to make an intervention or recommendation at this stage, right? It's helping clinicians with their decision workflow a little bit better and faster. And there are cases where when the clinicians will override, obviously, what the recommendation is, right?
Sure.
Because there are so many other factors that we are not mapping, right? So we can only map, the stuff that we're able to detect and observe, but really understanding how the person's thinking inside is still hard to measure, right? And so I would say, there's still a lot of work to be done, but it's really interesting. We never before have we been able to collect and ingest so much data of an individual, from devices, cameras, voice, right, with Amazon Alexa and Google, and there's so many ways to collect so much more data. And now we've got these, data lakes and pools of information. How do we start making sense of it, right? And how do we start identifying models based on various indicators? That's kind of what we're doing now.
The device data, I was very, very excited and fired up about some of the device data, and just on a tear about, let's get as much monitoring information as possible into the patient's hands. Until the other day, my watch said I was ovulating, and and I went, checked it. I had my gender proper and everything, and it's literally on the 18th. That was the day. So once again, Rini, thank you so much, and I want to thank the folks at Lydian. Looks like we're pretty much wrapped up, and let's go ahead and exit stage left.